It's only been a couple of days since the big reveal. Now that you're probably just about recovering from the shock, let's have a first look and initial drive with this Audi e-Tron and see what all the fuss is about, shall we? Your reaction to my unveiling of this most unexpected Audi e-Tron as my next car has been quite overwhelming. A lot of you have been very supportive in the comments, very congratulatory, all that kind of stuff. A few of you a little bit sort of shell-shocked and maybe quite a little bit unhappy that I'm not covering sort of car EVs for the everyman. But rest assured that we'll certainly be back to that fairly shortly. And I do still have the BMW i3 and the Kangoo ZE that I can bring you content with as well. So I've not completely left you behind if you're one of the people sort of moaning about, oh, that's far too expensive and I want to know about more real world EV stuff, more attainable stuff. We will cover that as well. This is just a sort of additional thing. And I think quite a lot of people are like, well, I am actually really interested in hearing about what that's like and hearing the real world experiences. So I think we're on the right path. The reaction from most of you has actually been pretty good, and that's probably been better than I expected, so that's good. I think quite a few of you surprised by the costs involved here, but I mean, at the end of the day, as I said in the last video, this is an £80,000 car. It's never going to be cheap, is it? Well, no matter how you're funding it, how you're managing to get access to it, it's never going to be cheap. In this video, I'm just going to have a little bit of an initial drive, tell you some of my immediate thoughts, and we'll go from there. So straight away, the first thing you notice when you get in this car is it just looks and feels like a high-end Audi, but not like an electric Audi, just an Audi. It's, you know, premium quality, lashings of leather everywhere. They haven't gone down the route of using sort of obviously eco-friendly materials, a bit like the BMW i3, right? It's got a recognisably BMW cabin, but they've used a lot of recycled material and they've used stuff that you wouldn't otherwise find in a typical BMW. Audi have completely ignored that. They've gone for the full luxury kit out in here. And if that's exactly what you're looking for a car, especially if you're parting with £80,000, I don't think you're going to be disappointed. The material quality in here is all very good. I mean, like any car, I'm sure if I poke around it enough, I'll find something where I could be like, ooh, this plastic isn't that great. But I honestly don't know why car reviewers do that, because most of the bits that they point out are bits that you'd never touch anyway. And certainly the bits that you do commonly interact with in here are very good quality. It feels very well screwed together, feels very solid. You've got everything you could possibly want in here in terms of technology. Lovely big widescreen main infotainment screen. You got the digital cockpit with so you can configure how the speedo and the efficiency meters and all that displays, and there's loads of different options. You can actually bring the sat-nav map up so it's directly in front of you in place of well, underneath the speedometer. You still have a little speedometer, but you have the map there as well, which is pretty cool. One thing I think is a bit odd is we've got this second screen here that controls the climate control. Now, it's dedicated to the climate control. It doesn't do anything else. I'm just not sure it was particularly necessary. I actually saw an article a few weeks ago where one of Audi's designers was saying that they were committed to keeping physical controls for core functions and things that the drivers need to be able to access and access quickly while they're on the move. Climate control is one of those functions, and I do wonder if maybe that's based on customer feedback from people that have had one of these. It's easy enough to control, and it does have like haptic feedback, so it's not just a case of a touchscreen like your phone. When you press the sort of supposed buttons on the screen, it gives you feedback in the forms of a sort of vibration of the screen. It's quite nice, but some buttons would probably have been just as good. I don't really know. I feel like it's maybe trying to be premium for premium's sake has maybe been the sort of driver there, but it's okay. It's responsive. It doesn't lag. It doesn't stop showing you what you want to see or anything like that. It works. I just don't know if it's actually the best interface for the climate control. Lashings of tech in here. I've got a wireless charging port for my phone and all those kind of things you probably come to expect. Some of you noticed in the comments this car does not have the fancy digital mirrors. So one of the big flagship things the e-Tron brings to the market is the digital mirrors, where you have cameras in place of your wing mirrors and then you have a screen on the door card instead of a mirror. That is a £1,500 optional extra. I'm guessing Onto, for whatever reason, didn't want to opt for that. Part of me wonders if it's because, you know, like any rental vehicle, you're going to have people that are not familiar with it driving it. The mirrors might get knocked. A camera is going to be a lot more expensive to replace than a traditional mirror. I know if I was a fleet manager, it would be something on my mind that, are we going to end up on the hook for replacing these things every 5 minutes? And so they've opted for just the standard mirrors. It might be that for whatever reason they don't think that's a desirable option on the second-hand market either. Quite commonly with rental vehicles like this, it'll actually, Audi UK will retain ownership of the vehicle, and when onto are done with it, or when they reach the sort of defined mileage threshold, it will then go straight to a main dealer and sold as an approved used car. And it might be that for whatever reason they don't think that that's a spec that is going to be desirable when it comes to offloading these cars to the second owner in the future. Who knows? But all I know is we don't have it. This basically is e-Tron 55 Black Edition with no optional extras apart from the metallic paint. As far as I can tell, it doesn't have anything additional. It just has the core specification. Anyway, that's enough waffle about what it is and what it isn't. I've got Constantine safely strapped in the back, so let's go for a drive, shall we? So I think the first thing you notice in here, and perhaps it shouldn't be too much of a surprise, is just how insulated the cabin is. The level of road noise is just a lot lower than what you'll get from other EVs that I've driven. Obviously I've never driven anything at this sort of luxury end of the market. I would certainly expect if I was in a petrol or diesel car at this kind of price point, it would be similarly well insulated and quiet. So you add to that the reduced sort of drivetrain noise. What I have noticed is the pedestrian warning system on this is quite loud. You can certainly hear it at lower speeds, but that's probably a good thing to stop people getting run over. It does make for a very calming journey. So this isn't the first drive. Yesterday I made a 200-mile round trip, which was actually a pretty good introduction to the car, and that was a 200-mile, well, pretty much all A roads, so not your perfect sort of smooth motorways, more your sort of twisting, bumpy A roads, but it was a really good journey. I didn't need to worry about range at all. I did the 200-mile journey. I left with 100% state of charge. I did the 200-mile journey and still had sort of 50 miles remaining on the gasometer, so that's not actually a million miles away from its claimed WLTP range. Quite happy with that. Honestly, it was quite good weather. Temperatures up towards sort of 18 to 20 degrees, so obviously I'm sure that doing the same thing in winter would be quite interesting, but a lot of people talk about range and efficiency in the context of this car, and that it's absolutely terrible, but that was 2.8 miles per kilowatt hour, which, considering this car is the size of a small country, I don't think that's absolutely terrible, and I think that would definitely be a sort of efficiency level that you could live with. Probably have a longer journey coming up later this month, so it'll be quite interesting to see what it's like when I do need to stop on journey and charge, and where I think charging speed will be the real game changer, rather than the sort of out and out range itself. Some other cars, there are other cars out there that will, because they're more efficient on a smaller battery, they will be able to go as far as this will, but they'll perhaps not charge as quickly, and that means you'll still be stopped for a little bit longer. So I'm hopeful that as long as I can find fast enough chargers, that will be an interesting experience. One thing I do find quite interesting about this, and it's actually been a little bit frustrating so far, is it seems to have a regen setup which I think has been designed with people in mind that haven't never driven an EV before. So the default setting is that when you lift your foot off the accelerator, it'll just coast. It won't use the regen at all to slow you down, and it'll only even start using regenerative braking when you touch the brake pedal. Now obviously most EVs are set up, if not for sort of full one pedal driving, for at least a variation of it, whereas when you lift your foot off the accelerator, it will slow you down, you get a little bit of regen. And now this can be configured to do that. You've got these paddles on the steering wheel here, which obviously, rather than being gear shifting paddles like they would be in a petrol Audi, they allow you to adjust the regen. So there are two modes for that. You've got automatic and manual. In automatic mode, as soon as you get back on the accelerator, the regen level goes back to the coasting mode. So again, you need to use the paddles in order to set that every time you want to slow down, and that's just a faff. I don't understand why you'd want to do that. I understand maybe having a little bit of control over the regen, but I don't know why you'd want to set it up every single time you're gonna have to come to a stop. It just seems like an unnecessary distraction to me. Unless I'm missing something and there's something more automatic to it than what initially meets the eye, it just seems like a massive faff. And it seems like they've not really thought that through. It's almost like it's discouraging you from using the regen at all. And then the other mode is manual. So in manual mode, you still set the regen using the paddles, but it persists. It doesn't reset when you go back on the accelerator, and therefore every time you lift off, it'll then use that amount of regen, a bit like in a car with one pedal driving. What I found with that is that's great, but you need to set it up every time you start the car. It doesn't retain that setting. So I don't quite know what Audi are going for here. I get giving you a sort of fairly easy level of customization. So in the i3, it has a very strong regeneration and a very strong sort of one pedal driving type experience. And as far as I know, now correct me if I'm wrong, you can't actually configure that. It's all or nothing. And it really is how you use the accelerator pedal that dictates how it drives and how much regen you get. And I get that that's the other extreme. It's, you know, has a lot less customization than what this has. But I think the fact that this routinely resets that, and you've got to remember to set it, and you find yourself, you know, coasting towards a queue of traffic, you're expecting it to slow down. I don't know. I think they dropped the ball on this one, and I would welcome your thoughts, especially if you've got one of these, if you've driven one of these. What do you think of it? And have you driven other EVs to compare? It just feels a little bit like Audi have sort of biased that too much towards people that have never driven EVs before, or aren't particularly interested in the features of an EV and want something that just drives just like a petrol or diesel car. And I can respect that. But it also wouldn't have been hard to make it so that those settings were persistent if I wanted them to be. And that's probably my main gripe about the way it drives. Other than that, it drives absolutely superbly. I mean, the drivetrain seems brilliant. It's so smooth, and the power delivery. Whilst, I mean, when you look on paper and see that it has like 400 horsepower equivalent or something stupid like that, I wouldn't think, you know, if you try and do a sort of full bore traffic light Grand Prix type launch, it doesn't feel as quick as those numbers would suggest. It doesn't feel anywhere near as quick as the i3 does off the line and stuff like that. But then, of course, it does weigh a lot. It's like 2.6 tons, right? So that weight, hauling that weight around, no matter how good your drivetrain is going to take a bit of doing. And it certainly is brisk when you need it. I did a little bit of overtaking on the single carriageway roads yesterday, and you know, when you want it to get down the road and get you into a safer position quicker, it is very, very good at doing that. Like most EVs, you do have that sort of instant power delivery, and it doesn't need to think about it when you want to suddenly go from cruising to getting some power on, getting some speed on very quickly. It's certainly more than adequate in that department. But when you look at it on paper and you say, oh, it's 400 horsepower, that's going to be absolutely insane. You know, it doesn't feel like that. I don't think it feels like that anyway. Now, it does have a number of different driving modes. I think it's just in the default one now, which I think is sort of more efficiency focused. Those driving modes will impact both the power delivery, the weight of the steering, and also the air suspension. So it's got air suspension and it'll change the height. I haven't played with that yet, just driving it in the default mode for now, and maybe it will be that if I put it in one of the sportier modes that it'll really blow my head off, and certainly I will try and test that out and give you some feedback on that in a future video. But for now, very much just sort of bobbing around in the default modes and driving fairly gently, fairly sensibly. And it's a very nice place to sit in order to do that. One thing I did notice as well is that it has cruise control, but it appears to just be standard cruise control, unless I'm just not 100% sure how to use it. It doesn't seem to be adaptive cruise, and it doesn't, you know, track the car in front and all that kind of stuff. A little bit surprised at that, given that obviously features on even cars like the MG ZS and on pretty much everything else in between. So I'm a little bit surprised at this price point that we don't have that. But it could be user error. I will dig into that a little bit more. Or it could be, like a lot of things, it's another expensive optional extra that hasn't been added on. I'm not 100% sure. But it's not going to be a particularly great test for the handling today, just on the motorway. So, but what I can say is, certainly based on my drive yesterday, it feels very planted, very sure of itself. I'm cornering in it, you know, even though it's a massive beast of a car. It feels absolutely planted. It drives extremely well. It handles very well. I expected, you know, given it is the size of a small country, to be a bit like steering an oil tanker, but they've obviously put some serious time and effort into developing the suspension. And I guess it is, like I say, it's what you'd expect. If you're going to pay this amount of money for a car, you would expect it to handle well, and certainly, from what I've seen so far, it certainly does. Don't get me wrong, it's no sports car, but it doesn't wallow around and feel a bit like you're going to fall off the road should you try and take a corner a bit too quick. So I don't think it's actually allowed to do a first impressions of an EV video without talking about charging. So I'm at an Instavolt station now, 50 kilowatt charger. It seems to be in a Burger King and Greg's car parks. And all right, if you fancy something to eat. But as usual, one of the biggest weaknesses of the e-tron, and I knew this before I actually started driving one, but it's becoming very apparent now that I'm actually having to live with it, is the charger port placement. Why have they put the charging port on the front wing, just behind the front wheel, on the driver's side? Most CCS chargers I've encountered have the CCS cable on the left-hand side of the unit, just like this Instavolt one does. So you've got to stretch the cable round, you've got to drape it on the bodywork and hope it's not too dirty and it's not going to scratch anything, and it'll just about reach and you'll be able to plug it in. That really, like, this trend for putting the charging port in a silly place needs to end. What's wrong with just putting it on the front? Then any charger anywhere you can pull up, you can plug in, you can charge. All right, there is a few exceptions to that, but that's usually because they're in locations where they've been installed with side loading like this in mind. And I think Tesla probably started it by putting it on the back, right, where sort of almost where the petrol cap would be, but a little bit further back, almost on the tail light, so it's actually easier to get to. The position on this is just daft, especially because this car's quite so big. So you're having to squeeze into the bay at the best of times. It's not the biggest of charging bays here. And you can see from this photo, I'm really close to the curb. It's not good. There's a Renault Zoe charging next to me, so I've obviously got to make sure they've got room to get back in their car when they're finished charging, and not be blocking the second charger even if they weren't here. So yeah, I think the charging port placement on the e-tron really is not ideal, and obviously the sheer size of it, coupled with the fact that charging companies seem intent on providing you with the smallest possible charging bay that they can get away with, isn't making for a great combination. But in any case, we're plugged in, we're charging, it's pulling the full 50 kilowatts, almost it's your 49 kilowatts on the display out of this 50 kilowatt charger. And I think that is the e-tron's sort of party piece, isn't it, that on a 50 kilowatt charger it will pull 50 kilowatts pretty much all the time, almost all the way up to fully charged. We're at 51% battery at the moment, so going to let this charge. I'm trying to use the public charging as much as I possibly can, because obviously it's included in the subscription. It doesn't make sense to pay for home charging if I can charge for free using networks like Instavolt. And there was one or two comments along the lines of, well, what if you don't have any chargers for those networks in the places you need to be? Well, I guess you need to do your research. If you want to take one of these cars from onto, and the charging being included is a big part of that, then you want to do some research into what's actually available in your area, because, I mean, it's not like there's just a couple of networks, right? So we've got Instavolt, we've got BP, and they're obviously the really big networks in themselves. So included in the Shell subscription is Shell Recharge, New Motion, Alpha Power, ChargePoint, Chargy, eFlux, ESB, EV Box, EV Driver, Fastned, Franklin Energy, Has2Be, Ionity, Last Mile Solutions, Osprey, Vattenfall UK, and Virta. So it's not just Shell, that's actually quite a big list. And actually, when you look at coverage-wise, those networks are actually all quite large. Obviously, there's some small ones, some really small obscure ones in there I've never heard of, but Osprey, Ionity, Shell alone, right, that's a decent sized network in itself. And then when you add Instavolt and BP into that, I don't think you'll be struggling too much to find a charger. Now, see, there's a notable example missing from that list, and that would be GridServe. I'm hoping that GridServe and Onto are going to work together at some point. At least at some point. I don't know if he still is, but the CEO of GridServe was driving an Onto lease car at one point. So I'm hopeful that there's a deal to be done there, and that they're interested in offering that service, because obviously being able to charge on the motorway network, especially once GridServe complete their upgrade work, would be a really good thing. But that was just a brief introduction to the e-tron. I'm quite taken by it so far. I really do like it. I think it's difficult to appreciate the level of comfort and refinement that you've got here. I think you need to sit in one, you need to drive one to quite fully appreciate it. This is a proper full-on luxury car. There's no real compromise here, and I think that, at least at the moment, maybe in the colder weather I won't be saying this, but I think at the moment the range is enough that you don't need to worry too much about charging unless you're making really, really long journeys. I think that what I'm finding so far is that it's just less of a concern than it was with the MG ZS. Now, obviously, it's completely unfair to compare the two cars, but I am finding that the longer range is just giving me a bit more confidence. And I guess though, if I was in something like a Hyundai Kona, I would feel exactly the same way. So that's not exclusive to the e-Tron, but it's quite a nice feeling. I'd welcome to hear your thoughts in the comments. I'm sure there will be many. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.